indie game garden.
John Lansing's solo development studio is called Eggplant Apps. John stepped away from his job as a staff engineer at Uber because he had been tinkering with a prototype for a game that he just couldn't get out of his head. That game, which would combine the classic turn-based tactics of Final Fantasy Tactics with the sport of football, is called, aptly, Fantasy Football Tactics. And my friends, it is an absolute banger. The football in this game is a fusion of the Earth sports we know, combined with magical powers and turn-based action that makes the loop of the game feel astounding for sports-inclined nerds like me. It's an honor to have John on the show today. I really appreciate how eloquent and generous he is. So now, let's go ahead and turn it over to him. John, thank you so much for being here. Before we dive into the nuts and bolts of fantasy football tactics, I'd love to hear more about your path toward making games in the first place. Before pursuing fantasy football tactics full-time, you worked as a software engineer for companies like Microsoft, MapQuest, and Uber for nearly 15 years. What was the decision like to strike out on your own and make your game?
Yeah. So I studied computer science in college. And part of the impetus for that was because growing up, I always wanted to make games. I can still remember, like the first time I saw Super Mario 64, playing it at a Blockbuster kiosk was sort of like a very pivotal moment for me. And I was like, wow, this, like, somebody made this. And that just like really got my imagination going. So I always thought that I was going to go to school for essentially programming and coding, and then go get a job in the games industry. But what ended up happening was I did all that first part and then kind of ended up going into more traditional software development for various reasons. One of which is sort of just like the opportunity around my home. So I live in Colorado, and there's definitely some game development here, but especially at the time, like not a ton of opportunity. And I also just found other things that were sort of tangentially related to gaming that I found really interesting. So my first job out of college, I was doing like my title was actually a multimedia engineer. So I was working, with animations. My customers were designers. It's very visual, right? And that sort of just set me down this path to all those companies that you listed. And I was also fortunate enough, just timing wise, where around 3 years out of college and going through the recession and everything, it wasn't long after that iPhone development opened up. And so, I had always still been interested in game development, and it's something I always wanted to do. And as soon as that opened up, I was like, well, I'm going to go learn how to do this and make a game. So I actually made my first game for iPhone. It did okay, like at least critically, like, and it was a good learning experience. And then, I just kind of stayed close, straddling both sides where, for Microsoft and MapQuest and even at Uber, I was able to work on like OpenGL rendering stacks for maps and lots of problems and domains that would be familiar to people that are in game development as well. And so, along the side, I've always kind of kept an interest in game development, and I sort of used my skills, as a software engineer, and would bring them back to game development and vice versa. So that was sort of the winding road there, and I'm still kind of in that place. And then in terms of like what the decision was like, it was scary to leave like a very comfortable job, but it is kind of, I was at Uber actually for 7 years, and I learned just a wealth of things while I was there. I think people talk a lot about the experience that they gain at jobs, but there's also a lot of education that happens too. And so I learned a lot, and it had just kind of reached a point where it was becoming a little bit too stressful for me. There's some personal things going on in my life as well. And I kind of looked myself in the mirror and it was like, I need to take a break from this. And that game development thing has always kind of been there on the side. And it's time to maybe give that a real shot and get, what ended up becoming Fantasy Football Tactics, try to get that out the door. So that was sort of what that's like.
That's awesome. I love to hear that part of the decision to step away from the more corporate job and pursue development on your own was, partially related to like mental health and doing something you enjoy during the day, and how that has contributed, I'm sure, to like how fun the game feels as you having fun with it and seeing that release. And not to kind of like get too off track here, but I was wondering like how much of an asset you found the obviously very like visual nature of your programming background to be in making a game. Like I think a lot of the at least program first developers I've talked to have been more disconnected from like the aesthetics, but it sounds like a
Mhm.
lot of your background has to do with like the linking up of the code to something visual. And I was wondering,
Mhm.
does that come into play? Is it just a helpful background when using a game engine, which I'm sure is different than kind of the interfaces you were working in previously? But
Mhm.
I was just wondering if you had any thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's a really good question. It's a lens I haven't really thought through, but I think you're spot on. And I think it also speaks to like what interests me about this. There's something
Mm-hmm.
about people interacting with devices and the experience that can create that's just inherently interesting, I think, to game developers and designers, even if it's not a digital, video game, right? Like if it's a tabletop or whatever too. Um, so in some cases, like the skills translated literally, right?
Mm.
So I referenced that first job out of college is with a small company called Electric Rain. That their primary tool was a 3D modeling tool called Swift 3D,
Mm.
and so this was back in early 2000s or mid 2000s. And if you could rewind the clock back that far, the internet is full of Flash
Mm.
applications, right? And so Swift 3D did this thing where it was a full 3D modeling tool, not unlike Blender or something like that, or
Right.
um, some of the other ones. But its secret sauce was that it could actually export two-dimensional vector animations in Flash,
Oh, cool.
which basically means that in early 2000 you could build 3D content and deploy it on the internet, which
Yeah.
was pretty mind blowing. So it had a big following. The company did really well with it. Um, I was not hired to work on that product. I was hired to work on something different that was actually in C sharp. So like I
Mm.
learned, I got very good at C sharp, which came in handy now because that's what I'm using to build my game in Unity.
Yeah.
Um, but I did eventually end up working on some components for Swift 3D, and so I learned basic things like, file formats. What are vertices, right? Like three-dimensional positions. What are textures? How do those work? What are texture maps? Like all of this real basic stuff for 3D graphics. Like I literally learned in my first job out of college, and so all of that experience translates directly now, and I'm able to wrap my head around basic things like cameras and texturing and modeling and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
In other cases, I think it's not quite as obvious, like working on mobile apps for so long and just sort of like what would be considered user features, whether it's like at MapQuest doing turn by turn navigation, those kinds of things. A lot of the things that you learn in building user experiences for mobile is that people don't read stuff,
Mm.
right? They're in a hurry. They have a task that they want to get done. They don't read stuff, right? And so
Yeah.
I tried to keep that in mind. With video games, people actually read more than what typical users do, though. So,
Yeah.
like if it's story, it seems like people actually do take the time to read it. But if it's navigating through a UI, like it just needs to be quick and easy to navigate through. And so, I am not like a UX designer by trade, but I have worked with many great UX designers, and so trying to just pick up tricks, along the way. Or I have a friend who does have some design experience, and they were able to share with me, some tools to check out like contrast and what looks good. And then there's other just like accessibility things or like screen size things, like just lots of basic like UI development things that I do think carry over pretty well. So yeah,
Yeah.
I think it all goes back and forth, and I think the experience, almost to almost 100% of the software I've ever written has had a user facing component to it. And so I can't imagine that not being helpful in this project.
Yeah, the turn of phrase you used, like wrap your head around the
Mm-hmm.
project, I think for me creates a really successful image of like what a solo dev has to do as far as like not only seeing it from, you know, a programming stance or an aesthetic stance or what have you, but rather like seeing it as an integrated product, obviously, and having a hand on all of those different fantasy footballs, if you will, in order to be able to yeah, like create something that connects with people. So love hearing your perspective on that. With that in mind, I was interested in how you came up with the idea for fantasy football tactics. Have you always enjoyed tactics games and
Mm-hmm.
sports? What was kind of the inspiration there?
Yeah. I came up with the idea a long time ago. My earliest memories of the idea or the concept was I was still, I believe I was in college. I was actually still living at home when I was going to college. And, growing up, I'm going to kind of try to answer both questions at the same time. So growing up in my
Yeah.
family, we're from Colorado, diehard Denver Broncos fans. When I was really young, I was actually very bored of football, and my grandparents would come over every Sunday to watch the game with us. And my grandpa was also like not super into football, so we would always kind of hide off in a back room. And he actually was an artist,
Hmm.
and so he would kind of show me stuff. He was very very talented, and he would show me stuff just like drawing wise, and we would sit and draw and hang out. Or sometimes he would sit and watch me play a video game. He loved watching Mario break bricks and stuff like that.
Hmm.
So when I was real young, I was not that into sports, but as I got older, I got more and more interested in football, and then started playing fantasy football like with my
Hmm.
family and with my dad. And that was really a key where it went from just like rooting for the Broncos to like this much bigger thing that actually
Right.
in some ways resembles strategy games when you really
Hmm.
think about it, because you're trying to optimize, okay, who's the best quarterback, who's the best wide receiver. And it's not just about the best overall, but it's who's the best one that I can put on my team at this time, right? How can you find the players that you think are going to be good but nobody else thinks are going to be good, right? And so I started getting really into football like in my teenage years, just watching it and playing through that. Um, so the answer to the if I was always into sports, the answer is no, and that kind of came over time. Um, Tactics games, I didn't know what they were. Growing up, like I had no idea what an RPG was
Hmm.
growing up until I encountered the first Pokemon games and Final Fantasy VII after it came over here in the US. So uh, yeah, I was a little bit late to the party on some of that stuff, but slowly, getting into the Final Fantasy series and then being exposed to Final Fantasy Tactics. And I mean, that's also kind of a watershed moment. The first time you see that, like, there's nothing like that you've experienced, right?
Yeah.
Um, and it's just this combination of chess, and it's so dramatic, and it looks like a diorama, and it's just really intriguing. And I had several failed attempts to play through it because it was just so opaque to me. Like I had no idea how it was working, what to do, but like it almost didn't matter because it's just like this just looks cool. Like there's nothing like this. And so fast forward a few years, around in the early 2000s, the Game Boy Advance version came out, Final Fantasy
Hmm.
Tactics Advance, and that one did a good job of lowering the barrier of entry and kind of simplifying things. And of course, it has like a little bit more of a charming aesthetic. And I'm a huge Nintendo fan. Like that's everything Nintendo, Mario, Zelda, Metroid, Fire Emblem, like all that stuff. I'm very into it. Uh, and so I was able to really sink my teeth into the advanced version. So that was actually like my first tactics RPG that I ever really got into. And
Yeah.
I would sit and play it like literally on football Sundays, family and friends or whatever would be over. We'd be watching the Broncos. And I'd be watching it in the background, sitting on the couch with my Game Boy Advance playing Final Fantasy Tactics Advance. And that's the first time I had the idea. I was like, watching the formations of offensive line and defensive line on the screen, and they're talking about the strategy of this. And Mike Shanahan was the coach of the Denver Broncos at the time, and they always talked about his famous 10-play script that he would open the game with. And every NFL team does. That's like very standard practice now, but I think it was kind of new at the time. And just the X's and O's, the chess match, the strategy of all this stuff, and it just clicked for me. I was like, this is so cool. Like how could you bring these two concepts together? And that was sort of the nugget of the idea.
Yeah, that's so, I feel like, poetic almost, in that the, childhood fantasy, if you will, of playing the tactics game and having football on in the background has translated into what I think is such a cool distillation of sports tactics, but also vocabulary that is so familiar to folks who are familiar with tactics games and, gamers at large, we could say. Um, and I feel one of the things that stuck out to me about what you were saying is like how stunning, if you are not familiar with kind of the isometric perspective or like that diorama-esque perspective of a tactics game, how stunning it can be to see it for the first time and like rotate the camera around if you can do that, and how timeless an aesthetic that is. And that's one of the things that's really charming to me about fantasy football tactics is, yeah, like having two things that are so familiar to me as someone who likes sports and games come together to be this very, I would say, almost cozy package at times, but then also to have this deep strategy
Yeah.
is fascinating to me, and something I've loved getting my hands on with the demo. So the best way I can characterize the game within the game in fantasy football tactics is a mixture of like American football and, oddly enough, like rugby is another thing that I was connecting with as I was playing through. And there's magic and other abilities thrown in for good measure. What was it like designing the sport in particular for the game? Like, what kind of concessions did you have to make? I saw some of your early screenshots looked a lot more like a football field. So I'm just interested in the process of designing the sport in particular.
Yeah, it wasn't anything I set out to do, for sure. Like I was, and it's a really good way to talk about it. And because it is, for people that are interested in checking it out, like just from like a marketing perspective, it's something which is also something that indie devs have to get their head wrapped around, that I have been, I don't know, more successful at times than others, but it really is like, it's just kind of its own thing. It's like, it's this made up thing, right? I call it football. I call it fantasy football in the game, just because that was sort of the whole shtick. I had the title for the game almost immediately as well. Like that was just always what it was going to be called. When I first sat down and started prototyping it, and you alluded to those screenshots, I was really thinking much more of a literal translation of American football. So the thoughts that were going through my head, just to kind of like convey it, was, and this kind of ties back to what I was talking about watching football in the background, was I was like, how cool would it be if people like cared, they had like they really cared about like what their offensive lineman was going to do.
Yeah.
I was like, that was sort of like a tenet I kept circling around. I was like, it has to be interesting for you to like move a guard or a tackle somewhere else along the line to like block for the running back. And so like that was in my mind. And then the mechanics of it were, very down and distance based, 11 on 11, a literal 100-yard football field. Right. And so those are some of the things that drove the early prototype. And it might sound obvious now, but like I thought it was a totally reasonable direction to go. But you get all that up and running, and then you try to put like this one at a time turn-based system on top of it, or even like a Fire Emblem style, like where you can move your entire team at once, and then the other entire team gets to go. You could do those things, but it gets really boring, first of all, because you are managing so many people on such a huge field, and like nobody has anything to do ever. You're just moving chess pieces around, and it's just not that interesting. It reminds me too of a book I read. I forget exactly which game design book it was in, but it talks about how walking is not gameplay.
Mm,
A lot of the early fantasies of amazing, interactive worlds that we had in the 2000s were like, well, we're going to have these giant worlds and you can go anywhere and do anything, right? That like we do have those now. Um, but if you're just holding up on the control pad and your character's just walking, like you're not doing anything. And so that's where
yeah.
games like Breath of the Wild and all these open world games have figured it out, where it's like, yeah, you're going great distances, but you're getting distracted all the time. Like there's always something
Mm,
to do that's not walking, right? Or there's other modes of transportation that are more fun. And so similarly in a tactics game, like in these early prototypes, I kind of ran into that where it's like, well, this isn't a game. You're just like moving stuff around and it's not very interesting. And so that set me down the path of like, okay, well, what am I going to do? And I forget the exact details of this, but something that I've also been kind of interested in, like being interested in football and obviously being kind of a nerdy guy, is like, well, how did football get invented? Like, when
mm,
was it invented? How is, what makes it different? And so I started researching all that stuff a little bit more, and you find out that rugby and American football and soccer, like, all kind of have common roots.
mm.
And there's lots of different cultures that have similar sports throughout history. And unfortunately, um, like sports aren't quite as well documented throughout history as lots of other things, but they're just as strong a part of human culture as art and anything else is too. And so there are some nuggets to be found. Something really cool that I learned is like really ancient forms of soccer were basically just like a pig's bladder, or something in a town where literally the entire town would participate, and there's like no rules, like very horribly violent games, but the idea was to get the pigskin to, or the pig intestines or whatever, to one side of the town versus the other. And they would
Yeah.
do this once a year. And you can even look up in some cultures, like I think in Italy, I forget what the name of the sport is, but they still do like recreations of their version of the sport, right? But to bring it back on track a little bit, it turns out that sort of colleges in the Northeast of America, I think, were largely responsible for kind of like slowly converting some of the rules of like soccer and rugby, and it became gridiron football. And then it wasn't even until much later that the forward pass was invented. I think that was I forget if it was in the 1800s or 1900s. But once that happened, then it's like, okay, then it's American football. That's like what we all think of today. There's like a quarterback, there's passing, there's all this kind of stuff, all the down and distance rules, right?
Yeah.
Make it interesting. Whereas in soccer, you have offside. Like they don't want you to do these long bombs down the field in soccer. And we can get into the distinctions between using your foot versus your hand. I'm just trying to illustrate that as I started researching this stuff, it kind of gave me it was a very liberating feeling, because I
Mm,
was able to bring that back to my game. And I was like, actually, like, let's rewind this. The thing that matters is that the game is fun, and um, you can call it football or whatever you want to, and you can totally make up your own rules. And so I started just kind of piece by piece trying to think through what are the kinds of decisions I want people to be making,
mm.
and then work, made changes from there. And I'm happy to go into specifics, but I've been talking for a while, so I'll pause. Pause
No,
there.
yeah, this is all wonderful to hear, and the thing my mind keeps coming back to is the importance for someone like you making a game, in particular a game that they obviously have had the idea for a long time and have been imagining over a period, is taking the feeling that they want to evoke and learning how to translate that into mechanics, where it's like you might, like you said, lose the entire like initial conceit as far as like it being on a football field or what have you, but being able to maintain the feeling and like the feeling that inspired you and the feeling that you want to evoke is like the important through line, which I love hearing about. And yeah, I
Yeah.
guess I was wondering if you had any other thoughts on that or wanted to expand at all. I love hearing this stuff. So if there's anything else you wanted to kind of wrap up this part of the conversation with, I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, sure. I'll share just a couple more things. So like,
Yeah.
um, to bring it back to like the inspiration from these sports, it really gave me the freedom to start picking and choosing like what am I going to do. And so um and of course, like in the back of my mind is Final Fantasy Tactics, right? And what are
Mhm.
the feelings that that evokes, and what are the things that I want to pay homage to there, right? Because I'm not trying to just make a clone. And I think people have been really gracious and like really, really kind. The feedback has been for the game. And I think people get it, that it's like, I'm not just trying to copy that. I'm trying to, like you said, use some of that vocabulary, use some of the mechanics that are so brilliantly done in that game, and just bring them to a different context, right? And so I love the free flowing turn system, right? That's
Mhm.
something I love. And so I was thinking through that, like, how is that going to work in a football game? And it's like this relatively simple decision, right? Am I going to do a Fire Emblem style where you can move your entire team once and then the other team gets to go? Or is it going to be more like Final Fantasy Tactics, where it's like there's a turn order, and I love being able to manipulate turn order. That's like something that I've tried to put into the game. I loved it in
Yeah.
Grandia 2 as well, like huge inspiration, like being able to manipulate time. And so I was like, well, soccer is just it's free flowing. Like there's no down and distance. Whoever has the ball, right? And so I really tried to use actually soccer as an inspiration for the turn order system, as well as the original like implementation in Final Fantasy Tactics. Um, so that's something that came in. The field was too big. 11 on 11 was too big. That just kept shrinking down and shrinking down. I do want to release the game on mobile, but I was actually going to lead with releasing it on mobile, and so that drove
Mm.
a lot of those decisions where it's like, okay, the fields are smaller. It's going to be 4 on 4. There's no like recruiting. There's no equipment. There's no items. There's no currency. I was just like cutting like things that are found typically in RPGs left and right, because I was like, I just want this to be streamlined. You should care about these 4 characters, the turn to turn decisions that they're making. um, how are they going to get the ball back? Are they going to be able to throw the ball to a teammate? Do they need to cast a fire spell to hurt the enemy? Just like all these little things. And it wasn't any one thing, but just slowly over time it started crystallizing. And I think other game developers can relate. And whether this translates into ultimate success or not, I don't know. But there was a point where all these things added up, and I found myself getting distracted from building the game because I was just messing around like with the battle system, like just playing it.
Yeah.
And that's when I knew. I was like, okay, I'm close. Like this is
Yeah.
working. And then I was able to take a step back and really start thinking through, okay, what are the abilities? What are the classes? What's the story like? The aesthetic and all that. So yeah, that's been like kind of a good encapsulation of the journey, I think, from the prototype to evaluating the real sports to what it has become.
Yeah. I've loved hearing it, and a couple of thoughts came up. Like, I think it's going to be awesome on mobile. Like, what a great arena for such a like wonderful, colorful package. Um, B, I think some of the mechanics that you have in the game are like brilliantly simple, but in that simplicity, like very elegant, and like they make sense as far as just like coming to it, whether you are a tactics player or a sports lover or both. Where just a few things to highlight, like mentioning the turn order. When you wait without doing anything, you can bump up your turn order. When you like complete a pass, you can bump up the player that like caught the pass's turn order. And I think that just really it reminds me of, say, in American football, like when a receiver catches a pass in stride, it's so different than when, it's like behind them and they have to like change their body positioning and change their momentum to catch it. And those little tweaks for how it affects the mechanics of the game, I think do a great job of translating that feeling as we talked about. And then the one other thing that I wanted to bring up is like the fumbling rules. So the way you get the ball is by like tackling your opponent, and if you make them fumble it, then you can grab the ball. And the chance of a fumble is dependent on what we all know as like a health bar, right? So the less their health is, the larger chance they have to fumble the ball. And I just thought these like little choices you've made as far as translating something from the high stakes war of like Final Fantasy Tactics, where you're ostensibly like killing other soldiers, to just like a sports match where it's like, in the end, if you win, the other players are like, oh yeah, good job, like you can move on. Like, it was fun playing that sport with you. I thought it was just beautiful, and a great indication, I think, of the success I hope is to come for the game. I was wondering, like, what would you say has been the biggest challenge in creating this game in, your engine of choice? On the other hand, has there been anything that has been easier or more fun to kind of vamp on than you expected?
Mm-hmm. Well, first, thanks so much for all the kind words. It means a lot.
Yeah, of
I
course.
think like,
They're all genuine. I've loved playing it so far.
yeah, cool. I appreciate it. Yeah, in terms of Unity, I've been really, really impressed. Like, uh, just from like a software perspective, it is incredibly impressive. A lot of my background is in mobile development. I forget
Mm.
how much we touched on that specifically, but most of the development I've done was in iPhone, a little bit of Android, and I was always really skeptical of any of these frameworks that claimed that they could be multi-platform, right, on mobile. And uh, Unity, like some of the later prototypes, like within the last couple of years of the game actually running on mobile, have just really floored me. Where it's like I literally didn't have to change a single line of code, and it works
Oh,
fine.
that's great.
Like on PC and mobile, it is like, wow, they have this dialed in. Um, so that's been really impressive. Uh, some other things. This is maybe answering both sides of the equation. So
Yeah.
I don't want to get too deep into like software engineering details. I'm not sure how interested your audience is in that, but like something that we talk a lot about in software development is this concept of decoupling. And what it basically means is that you want to be able to write one piece of code that does, let's say, just logic A, and then one other bit of code that does logic B. And then at some point, logic A and logic B are going to have to interact with each other. But you want to build it in a way so that like logic A could work with logic F over here,
Mm-hmm.
right? In the same way. And so this is where people hear the phrases like APIs or interfaces or things like that. And so and coding to contracts. And so we try to do that as software engineers just because we know that requirements are going to change over time for whatever it is that we're building. And so that was the world that I came from. And so when I started building the game, I really had that in mind. And also at the same time, you see headlines about Unity or any of these major players where it's like, oh, okay, well, now they're charging money. Now they're not, or they're charging like an exorbitant amount, but you have to make $1 million, et cetera, et cetera. And, um, and it starts just making you a little nervous, right? Because it's like, okay, am I going to spend tens of thousands of hours building this game in this engine, and then there's going to be trouble and it goes away? And so
Yeah.
I was keeping all these things in mind. And as I was building out the early parts of the game, I was like basically afraid to tie anything into Unity, right? So back
Mm.
to the analogy, let's call it Unity is like the logic A bucket, and my game is the logic B bucket. I was
Mm.
really afraid to say like, okay, logic B, you can just use logic A directly, you know?
Right.
And so I did all of this extra work to like really separate the logic. And some specific examples are like um, navigating through the different screens, right? Going from like title screen to the adventure screen to whatever, or loading different levels, or running the algorithm that the AI uses to select its next turn. So I did my darndest to make sure that all that stuff was completely independent, um, which was A, really hard to do, and
Yeah.
B, also a complete waste of time because Unity is a pretty, what I would consider to be a pretty opinionated framework. Like it wants
Mm.
you to build things in a certain way.
Right.
And what I learned is that, well, if you fight against that, then you're just hurting yourself. You're shooting yourself in the foot. And so there are still parts of the code base that are like the original form. So it's like very independent, which is cool for me because it's like, okay, yeah, maybe I want to switch over to Unreal someday, right? Then I could take that and like pop it over there. But I'm not going to do that. And the stuff that I'm building now, where I like am all bought in and like really familiar with Unity's patterns and how it wants you to do things, I'm building everything like so much faster than I was
Right.
before. So those are some of the pitfalls that I fell into, and that's like a me problem, not a Unity problem.
Mm.
Um, some other things that have been maybe difficult with Unity is that, and especially with this game, so it has been a really long production cycle, which I didn't intend for it to be, but it just started as like a side project that I was tinkering with, and I didn't start working on it full time until a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
But there was like 7 years in between those times, so almost a decade. Unity has changed a lot, and
Yeah.
it's deprecated features, it's introduced new things, and that's not unique to game development. As an iOS developer or Android developer, you have to deal with that kind of thing too. But it has been an interesting challenge with Unity, keeping up to date and like making sure I'm leveraging the things that I can be leveraging. But yeah, overall they've been moving, I think, in a pretty good direction, and I've been impressed with it. So yeah, hopefully
Yeah.
that answered the question.
Yeah, for sure. That's all interesting to hear. And as someone who's only dabbled with Unity myself in the past, it is so like it's something I had never considered, even just not having the technical expertise of like trying to completely separate the code from the engine or like have it be independent. And yeah, wow, that is it sounds like so much more work. And as you were saying, it is the type of tool that wants you to, yeah, like integrate everything into it. So I can see how that would have been a huge headache for when you were trying to make both of those things work. Um, you founded Eggplant Apps, which is kind of the name of your entity, in 2010 to make your iOS games and apps. One of those apps was actually a fantasy football app that you still maintain today, which I love that as part of the lore.
Yeah.
And I would love to hear more about like the other app you said you developed back then was your first game. I would love to hear more about what that was like. And if
Sure.
there's anything, more than Eggplant Apps just being like a legal entity, like is there any kind of, I guess, extra lore behind it or extra meaning that you imbue into the name or like the endeavor? Anything about that would be
Sure.
interesting to hear.
As one of my close friends recently pointed out to me, I named the company and formed the company before the emoji sort of has the connotation that it does today.
Yeah.
So just get that out of the way. It has nothing to do with that. The name of the company. So my wife and I had a really like beautiful garden in our backyard at our old place that we lived at the time. And we were just growing all kinds of stuff, tomatoes, cucumbers, and peppers, and just even like horseradish and stuff. And we grew eggplants as well. And it's actually like just a really beautiful plant if you've never seen one in person. Like it's just kind of gorgeous, and the fruit looks otherworldly, and then of course like eggplants are somewhat popular in Japanese culture, especially in the realm of gaming through various titles like I forget if it's like Kid Icarus and some other stuff like that. Yeah, I don't know. I was just kind of drawn to that as a name, and then there's sort of also like a double meaning to apps, which was like kind of a joke, where it's like that's also short for appetizers.
Right.
So eggplant apps is kind of like what is it? So that's the only lore behind the name.
That's good context.
But things actually go back just a touch further than that. So rewinding to whatever it was around 2009, 2008, 2009 during the recession, I had a coworker at that first company that I worked at out of school who was in marketing and like product design and other things like that. And things were basically in the process of falling through, as they were for many businesses back then. and I was furloughed, and but we kind of struck up a connection, and this, like I said, iOS development started out, and so the two of us actually worked together on my first game that I built that was called Absorb, which I can talk a little bit more about in a second, as well as this fantasy football app. So basically, I was still playing or I still do play fantasy football. I'm in the exact same league that I was in at the time, and it's a full dynasty league. So we're going on. It's closing in on 20 years,
Wow.
where we basically only draft rookies and we only cut a handful of players every year. And so your team, if you draft a player, like I still have Lamar Jackson on my team from when he was a rookie, right? So it's a very intense. Like we do IDP the whole thing, and it's backed by a smaller fantasy website. They're called myfantasyleague.com, and they actually have a completely open and free API, and they have for years. And so their whole model was, we're not going to build a mobile app, but we're going to let other people build mobile apps.
Right.
And so it was just sitting there, like a live scoring API, rosters API, like all this stuff. And there wasn't anything on the market. And we happened to be the first one to market with like a really simple live scoring application. And it did really well. And I still maintain it to this day. But I was working with this other guy, and one thing led to another, and it wasn't like successful enough to really continue on its own, but it became like sort of a side hustle is what the term would be now, right?
Yeah.
And so we were working under the name Air Sprout, which was sort of the name for like this business, and we decided not to go forward with it. And I purchased sort of the company laptop and the rights to everything from my friend for pennies. It was absolutely nothing, and I just kind of kept messing with it on my own. And yeah, at its peak, that fantasy football app had like 50,000, I think, active users at a time.
So cool.
I had 1 year where iAd was still going on that was like really particularly successful, and there was a minute there where I thought that was actually going to turn into my full-time gig, like randomly. But yeah, it's still around today. It's ad supported. And so you can check that out. And it's called MFL Mobile. So M as in Mary, MFL Mobile. And it's only for iOS right now. I've had customers ask for an Android version. At this point, there's sort of like a handful of apps for both iOS and Android that other people have done the same thing that I did, which is very cool. So there's some choice for you there if you use that website.
Great.
Yeah, so that was that whole thing. And then the very first game that I built, it was called Absorb. And this was around the time, it was like not long after some of the other like more popular mobile games came out. Like Alice was one of them. And what was it called? Flight Path, I think, where you could you could trace little paths for the airplanes. It was around that time. So it was not saturated nearly to the degree that it is today. And like we released the game, and it's kind of a physics-based arcade game. And so the idea is that different orbs of different colors show up on the screen, and orbs that are the same color, you can kind of drag them together, and they'll merge together and become a little bit bigger. And then there's gates at the bottom of the screen that are also the same colors. So the idea is like you have to build up like a big ball and then try to get it into one of the gates along the bottom of the screen. It's almost a little bit like Tetris, where you're kind of like clearing the space, right? So you want to like merge orbs together and get them to go into a gate. If anything bad happens, something bad happening in this game is two different colors touching each other, then you actually lose one of your gates. And the only way to regenerate it is to like build up another orb of that color and have it sit around long enough, and it'll regenerate a gate for you. So it's kind of this push and pull. And I put like all the levels in the game are almost like achievements, where it's like some of the later ones are like, do this crazy thing, like do a bank shot, like a 4x bank shot, where you have to send an orb flinging around all the sides of the screen and then have it go into one of the gates at the bottom without touching it. It was very like Meteos was, which is a game by Masahiro Sakurai, came out for the DS somewhere around there, and it's a really, really cool puzzle game. If you haven't played it, I encourage everyone to check it out if you have a DS lying around. But I was playing a lot of that at the time, and so I was really inspired by that, and and put all kinds of like stat tracking and stuff into the game, and it was a lot of fun. But it's not available to play anywhere today, unfortunately.
Yeah, I was gonna ask.
There are some videos of it up on YouTube, and I still have all the source code. It's just kind of one of those projects on the back burner that eventually I would like to brush up and get up to date, and
Yeah,
maybe do a launch across both iOS and Android at some point, just for posterity, not
yeah,
for
that'd
any
be
other
sweet.
reason. Yeah,
I mean, it sounds really fun. It sounds like a game I would like to play, but right now it
cool.
will merely be an imaginary game of the mind. I was wondering what your so you obviously have experience, over the years, being in the iOS marketplace to a degree, the Android marketplace with your apps. But as like is this your first time using Steam? I guess I should clarify.
Yes, it is.
I was wondering what have been some of your most important revelations. You talked about how marketing was its own beast earlier, about using Steam as a marketplace. I know I saw some videos highlighting your Next Fest demo, so I know you participated in that, and that was kind of
Mhm.
the demo launch. Like, what has that process been like, or have there been any important revelations?
Yeah, it's been really good. I mean, it's an amazing platform. Um, uh, and I think the biggest thing from like a marketing perspective that I've learned, and I should be clear, I'm still learning. Like I am no expert, right? And we'll see how this game does, but basically, it is very algorithmic driven, right? So
Yeah,
it's very similar to YouTube or any of these or TikTok or anything else, right? So Steam wants to surface games that will make money for the developer, but also for Valve, right?
yeah,
To gamers so that gamers have awesome games to play. They pay good money for those games. The developers are happy and Valve is happy. Like that's best case scenario. And that by all accounts and through my experience, they seem to give you plenty of exposure. And you unfortunately it comes down to cold math, where
yeah,
they can tell, okay, how many times have we shown somebody's thumbnail? How many times are people clicking on it? Of those people, how many are actually downloading the demo? Of those people, how many are playing the demo? How long have they played the demo for? It's just stats all the way down, and
yeah,
analytics all the way down, and they are a fine-tuned machine and getting better all the time, right? So on the one hand, it might sound very cold, but on the other hand, it's like what an amazing thing that we have that I can sit in my office and build this weird turn-based football game and have just as much an opportunity to be successful as anyone else, whether they're bigger or smaller, right?
yeah,
Um, so it's been cool learning about it. There definitely are some things that I wish it had that I think some of the other more mature ecosystems have. Like, even on YouTube these days, you can A/B test your thumbnails and all that. And I'm not a
mm,
YouTuber, but I just know enough about it,
yeah,
to speak to it. But you can actually that's something I would love for them to bring to Steam. Like everybody talks about how important your Steam capsule is, and I could go upload a new Steam capsule right now, and I'm not going to have any idea if it's working better unless
right,
it's like astronomically better or worse than what I have today. Like it would be
yeah,
really awesome if I could just upload two PNGs and have Steam show my game to 2,000 people and get like a clear click through rate and see which one is better, right? And then do that for every aspect of the page. Like I think that would be really wonderful because otherwise you're just guessing and you have no idea what's working and what's not. So there are some things like on the marketing side, um, on Steam that are I still think fairly opaque and it has room to grow. And by the way, if they implement those tools, it's only going to help them because it's just going to improve their conversion rates on everything.
right.
Um, but yeah, it's been a really good ecosystem. All the tooling around it seems pretty mature. The build uploading process is a little bit strange, but
Yeah, I've heard
you
that.
get used to it. And then like some of the other tools that have been really, really helpful for me, like they have a play testing feature, which is virtually identical to having like a demo build out. And there's a few different ways you can go about it, but it's a great way to just like start getting a build up and getting people to play it. You can do it invite only if you want, or you can just kind of open it up to random people, which is always better.
Hmm.
And then same thing for the demo. They have this feature now where your demo can be a separate page instead of just being a part of the main page. And the biggest thing that unlocks for you is reviews. And so I've been
Mm.
able to have my demo out there, slowly collecting reviews, both positive and negative. And you can actually act on the negative reviews before launching your game. So those are some of the strengths, I think. And yeah, overall, I've been really impressed.
Those are great insights to get, I think, particularly with someone who has the technical know-how to like parse through like improvements that could be made. Just because, like, obviously, as a Steam user, I'm less privy to the back end.
Mhm.
And that's great to hear. And it also illustrates for me, this is something I've talked about with other guests, but want to continue to like highlight. While some of the numbers can be cold and while that can be discouraging, it also brings up the importance to me of like how you really can make, a solo dev's day by wishlisting their game or playing their demo or what have you, because that can only, boost their numbers in the eyes of the marketplace. And that's going to be helpful in the long term. So I'm sure that's why you hear, make my day, wishlist my game, etc. from indie devs.
Yeah, present company included in that. Like, I really appreciate everyone that has supported the game through wishlisting, and especially leaving a review. Like, leaving reviews is sort of like a wish list on steroids. So if you really want to make a developer's day, go play their demo and leave a review. Um, even if it's like, just leave an honest review, because if it's a negative review because there's something that you found in the game that you think could be better, the developer wants to hear that from you early before they launch the game, so that they actually have a chance to maybe fix it. And if it's something that they can't fix, that's okay, but at least they learn for next time, right? And same thing for me. So, like, recently I got my first negative review, and it's because when the game starts, there's really intense flashing white lights.
Yeah.
And I grew up for years seeing all these warnings at the front of a video game. And it's totally slipped my mind, right? Like, I didn't realize that I needed to add that, but I had a player who had a really horrible experience with my game because it made them sick, right?
Mm.
And so, like, it's like, thank you. I'm so sorry, but also thank you so much for telling me, because I wouldn't have known that. I've had hundreds of people play the game, and you're the first person that said that, and so thank you for saying that. And I was able to, like, go back in and start fixing that problem, right? So not only does it help from a numbers perspective, but like, the feedback is so helpful to indie developers. And so for everyone out there that does leave the feedback, leave the reviews, thank you very much. It's awesome.
Yeah. And that anecdote illustrates what's so special to me about indie games too, is not only do we get, like, in my opinion, better, weirder, more interesting ideas to play, but we also are able to like make a direct impact, in any number of ways, as far as like if you make a comment on like the Chrono Trigger port on Steam, like no one's seeing that. I love Chrono
Right.
Trigger, but like,
Oh my
but
gosh, yes.
if you make a comment on, John's game on Steam, John is seeing that and acting directly on it. I just think that's so cool. I want to be aware of our timing. We're almost at the hour here, so I just
Yeah,
have two more questions that
sure.
I hope, while they might be difficult, I know we've talked through some of them, I hope they feel manageable enough and timely enough to answer. If you could
Sure.
give some advice to an aspiring developer, what would it be?
Yeah, it's a really good question. From like a technical perspective, I mean, there are just loads and loads of tutorials out there. Like, that's not going to be your problem. Um, I think I would probably boil it down to two things. The absolute most important one is to just start doing it, and I think that goes with any kind of creative endeavor that you have, whether it's writing a novel or making a film or writing music, like whatever it is. Like, just start doing the thing. Know that your first time doing it, you're probably not going to be very good, but a lot of times with these things, they're so large and complicated, like, you don't even know what questions to ask, and you're not going to know what questions to ask until you actually have tried it on your own. So, like, first and foremost, just start doing it. And like, you can go from not being a game developer to being a game developer in literally 60 seconds. As soon as you click the download button on your engine of choice, like, you're part of the club now. So welcome, you're a game developer. And that's how everyone got started. And it just happens that there are other people that have run into 10,000 problems and ask 10,000 more questions than you have, but eventually you'll be there too. And that's like the only difference. So just get started. I will shout out, like, I mentioned Masahiro Sakurai earlier, just like brilliant game designer, right? Like Kirby, Smash Bros, all this stuff. And there was a lot of press and hubbub around this when he first did this, and I haven't seen as much over time. But he has this completely free YouTube series where like each video is like 5 minutes long or something like that, and it is a treasure trove of just the most amazing game design advice you're ever going to find
Oh,
online.
wow.
It was like so helpful for me that I had to stop watching it because it kept like giving me more ideas of things to do. And it was like, if I keep going through this, I am absolutely never going to finish my game. Um, so if I could give anybody wanting to get in on this like advice, I would just say just start doing it and go start watching Masahiro Sakurai's game design series. It is like such a gift that like we are underrating it like so hardcore right now. It is such a gift to all game designers and game developers, and I think anybody that just like is interested in gaming in general. Like if you're interested in gaming history or like game preservation, even there's you're going to learn so much and take away so much from those videos. It's going to improve your life.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'll link that in the show notes, well below the place to wish list Fantasy Football Tactics on Steam. You've mentioned obviously a designer in that recommendation, but last but not least, I was wondering, what would you say your biggest influences are? We've talked about a number of games. Feel free to list specific titles or designers. I know you said you could go on for hours and hours, but maybe just a few minutes here so we can wrap up and be respectful of your time.
Okay. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I don't want this to turn into a 3-hour podcast, but it definitely could. I could keep going. So yeah, Sakurai is one. Obviously, like just Nintendo generally. I think we're learning more and more as time goes on, right? But it's like there's sort of been the figureheads, but there's also been some sort of people that don't have as big of names. So I wish I could give everyone the proper credit that they're due, but I'll just kind of give a blanket statement and say Nintendo is probably the biggest influence on me. Shigeru Miyamoto, obviously. I already shared, Mario 64, I think Ocarina of Time, like just huge watershed moments for me as a teenager, realizing that, oh, this is actually like a viable thing that you can do. And how amazing is this? Of course, the Final Fantasy series, both on the mainline side and on the tactic side. So like Sakaguchi, Uematsu. So I compose the music for the game too. So
Oh, really? I was going to ask. That's beautiful.
Yeah. So Uematsu is obviously a big, and Mitsuda are big influences there on the, soundtrack side. Matsuno from like tactics side and everything that, sort of all those crazy interlinking ability systems and all that kind of stuff are very cool. I think like maybe it would be interesting to like Shigeru Miyamoto is probably like the biggest one. And I love his advice too, which is for game developers and game designers, which is to experience things outside of games. Like famously, he brought his concept of gardening and stuff for Pikmin. And so I have other sort of like non-video game influences too. Like Smashing Pumpkins are my favorite band, and Billy Corgan is a big influence, as someone that just like never does the same thing twice and kind of refuses to do the same thing twice, and kind of comes from that like David Bowie lineage of just doing things a little bit differently. And other artists like that, and classical music I think is really inspiring. Impressionist art, go to it. If you're struggling to have ideas for your game, like go to an art museum. I think that like that is always really inspiring, and just see something different from a different perspective. So yeah, but maybe that sheds some enough light on it for now.
Yeah, that was awesome, and I love hearing the influences outside of games as well, which are always a great reminder that like even when you're doing something somewhat unrelated perhaps to the project you're working on or a passion you have, it all comes together to make something unique when an individual creator is making something. So John Lansing, thank you so much for your time. It's been such an enjoyable conversation, and I can't wait to hopefully share this episode with a lot of folks who will play your game.
Awesome.
And the world will be a better place for it. So thanks again.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me, and maybe we'll do it again sometime.
And that was John. I loved talking to him. I feel like he had such a great way of translating technical things into plain English for the less technically inclined folks like me, but also provided a rich perspective about what it was like to both make his game behind the scenes, but also interact with engines like Unity and marketplaces like Steam. So I feel like it was a really nice culmination of the process from start to finish, and I'm just so appreciative of his time, if you couldn't already tell. His game, Fantasy Football Tactics, really is a true joy, especially for someone like me who has just recently been getting into tactics RPGs as a genre, particularly with my journey with the PSP, played through Jeanne d'Arc, dipped in a little bit to Dysagia, if that's how you pronounce it, and of course FF Tactics. And so I find that John's version is the most approachable version of any of those games mentioned, and more, I would guess, just particularly because of the modern design sensibilities he's built in, but also obviously as a fan of the genre and someone paying homage to it, he has updated it in a way that feels authentic to the genre's roots, while also making it a lot more playable, colorful, and fun, in my opinion. So if you like sports at all, and maybe aren't as much of a gamer, I think you would get a lot out of it. But particularly if you are someone who appreciates sports, but loves games, I think you're going to absolutely adore this title. What it scratched the itch for me was like, I've always been someone who's weirdly loved the Mario sports spin-offs, mainly just because they include something that is a common vocabulary for me as an athlete and sports player, combined with, the things I love about games, them being colorful, them having these mascots we all enjoy, them having some of the same power-ups and abilities, and I always mix up the name. What Fantasy Football Tactics feels like for me is a much deeper version of that feeling, which is honestly the only thing I could ever want out of games. And so I'm so excited to pick up the full version. The demo is actually quite complete of an experience in itself, if you're asking me. If you're someone who just likes short games, maybe an hour or less, go pick up the Fantasy Football Tactics demo. The story is there. The character dialogue is really engaging and fun. And the gameplay is all there as well. I found myself kind of puzzling over the next move I'll make. Definitely feeling challenged by the enemy AI, even though it is just a demo. So can't say enough good things about it. Go wishlist it, go pick it up, go review it, do everything you can to support John in his endeavors, because boy are they well thought out, boy are they elegant, and boy are they fun to play. As far as other games, I've been dipping into. The main thing that's kind of been in front of me on my Steam Deck recently has been The Drifter, which was an outstanding kind of classic adventure game with modern sensibilities that I believe came out last year or the year before. The pixel art is beautiful. It was made by, again, a solo dev that goes by Powerhoof as their development studio. And they also have included, or I guess as kind of a showcase of what the Drifter was built on, they built a tool that I believe is called like Power Core or something like that, that integrates into Unity to kind of turn it into an engine specifically made to make kind of these classic 2D adventure games. And so I've been playing around with that a little bit and have been, dreaming my game developer dream, even though I've kind of hit my head up against a wall in that area of my life a couple times. As John said in the interview, the best way to do it is to just start. And so maybe I'll start playing around with that. But anyway, The Drifter. Awesome game, awesome story. The pixel art is gorgeous. I'm sure if you're tuned into the game scene at all, it's nothing you haven't heard before. But especially for me, as someone who just has a particular proclivity toward accents, and New Zealand and Australian accents in particular, the voice acting in this game is stellar. The main character just has this rich, deep, I believe it's Australian voice, and I can't get enough of it. So if you're looking for something to kind of scratch the narrative itch in your gaming background while also supporting an indie dev, which is what we're all about on this show, go pick up The Drifter. I believe it was on sale recently. I'm not sure if it still is, and give it a try. Another thing I really enjoyed playing, which you can kind of find my documentation of on Blue Sky at Darth Malks, that's M as in Michael, ALKS as in Sam, is Sparrow Warfare, which is the game made by an upcoming guest, Charlene Putney, along with her partner. It's a unique take on a deck builder in that it's using Mahjong mechanics, and the sprites are really cool, and they were made, I think, by pulling images from the public domain and kind of sprucing them up in Photoshop, which is an aesthetic I always like. So go check that out. There's a demo for it alongside the Fantasy Football Tactics demo. Other than that, I dipped in a little bit to Pokemon Lazarus, which is a ROM hack made by Nemo, who was like a pillar in the scene before, I think, taking some time off because the internet can be toxic, and I read into that story a little bit more. The game is fantastic, Pokemon Lazarus. It's like a whole new take on a Pokemon world. Feels kind of like Emerald, which is my favorite entry in the Pokemon series. So if you're just looking for another classic Pokemon, you can't do better than this. But the interesting thing and kind of the hook for me in playing it was looking into the harassment that Nemo received after releasing the game. He did the music for the game, and apparently people were really mean to him about it, in that it was imperfect, and mean to him about it in including like characters of color and gay characters in his game. And I just always hate to hear anecdotes like that. Obviously, closed-minded people are not the type of people that I enjoy engaging with in general, but it always stuns me how important it seems to be to a very vocal minority of the internet to put creators down, particularly because they're making things, oftentimes free things, that can be engaged with and enjoyed. And it boggles my mind. And it also makes me really sad, and it also makes me really driven to do this show to uplift creators. And it would be a dream to have Nemo on the show. I'm not sure if he'll do it because he's kind of taken a break from the community after this harassment, but it's just another reminder to me, and I hope to you all out there, to go out and support folks making art online. It is a harsh place to put yourself out there in this year of 2026. And so I just want to make sure that if you have any inclination at all toward art made by one person or a few people, that you go out there and tell them that you played it and that you loved it, or that you saw it or listened and that you loved it, because it can mean so much to those people and really keep them going. And I know that firsthand. So thank you for listening, and thank you for supporting small creators. I'll see you next time. Bye.